do 3 to 5 exercises for 3 to 5 repetitions per set, rest 3 to 5 minutes, and do that 3 to 5 times per week. The use of resistance exercise specifically for increasing testosterone, both in men and in women. And indeed, that is a powerful effect of resistance exercise. And indeed, it's mediated by the nerve to muscle connections. We talked about that in that earlier episode. I just want to briefly mention that protocol since it's distinctly different from the other protocols I've talked about today. The protocols I've talked about today thus far of explosive movements or of hypertrophy-based training, provided the training is 60 minutes or less, will cause increases in serum testosterone. That's been shown over and over again. And if the session extends too long, past 75 minutes, and is of sufficiently high intensity, chances are testosterone levels will start to drop and cortisol levels will go up in ways that can be detrimental to recovery and the goals of the training. But that's different than training that's specifically geared toward increasing testosterone. Duncan French, who's one of the directors of the UFC Performance Center, when he was a graduate student at University of Connecticut Stores, did some beautiful work. He and his colleagues found the ideal training protocols for stimulating testosterone release, which is something that many people want to do for a variety of reasons. And that involved doing 6 sets of 10 repetitions, even if it requires lightening the weight on one set to the next, with about 2 minutes, 120 seconds rest in between sets, which, if you think about it, is pretty short rest and is pretty darn hard work. Now, what's interesting is that there's a very limited threshold for increasing testosterone. That protocol of 6 sets of 10 repetitions led to these big increases in serum testosterone. But if people did 10 sets of 10, so just 4 more repetitions per set, then testosterone did not increase. In fact, you got more of this catabolic cortisol-like pathway. You get other benefits from the so-called 10 sets of 10 protocol, but not the testosterone increase and maybe even reductions in testosterone. Now, it's important to point out that that 6 sets of 10 was done with big compound movements, so things like squats or deadlifts or chin-ups or things of that sort. And those were done as single sessions, not in concert with a bunch of other exercise. Although if athletes are doing that, there's no reason why they couldn't also do other types of training elsewhere in the week. I asked Duncan about this, and he mentioned that done twice a week is probably the maximum amount that anyone could do that and still maintain this increase in testosterone. It's a very interesting protocol because as a neuroscientist, it's amazing to me that 6 sets of 10 repetitions with something causes a distinctly different result in terms of hormone output than 10 sets of 10 of the exact same movement. And it speaks to the exquisite way in which nerve to muscle connections dictate the whole physiology of your entire system. If there's a theme that I really want to bring forward today, is that weight training or resistance training of any kind is really used for either systemic effects, right? 10% of training done where you're feeling that burn, which means lactate will be present and sending signals to your brain and to your heart and to your liver that are beneficial, or isolating muscles, which may also generate a kind of a lactate or which is associated with the burn result, but that isolation of muscles is distinctly different. So systemic versus isolated. Those are the 2 general ways in which resistance training can be applied. So I just wanted to mention that earlier protocol because it's well supported by the literature. If you were to incorporate that protocol, you might ask, well, then can you do any other weight training during the week? And sure, of course you can, provided you're recovering. So let's talk about how you know if you're recovering, how you know if a muscle is recovered, and how you know if your whole system is recovered. Because recovery is what dictates whether or not you can come back and do more work of a different kind, meaning, I don't know, you do leg training one day, can you and should you come back and do upper body training the next day? And it dictates whether or not you'll see any improvement from session to session at all. Before I talk about recovery, I just want to make sure I nail down the details that I was able to extract from the literature and from my conversation with Dr. Galpin. If you're wondering how quickly to perform repetitions for sake of hypertrophy or strength gains, anywhere from a half a second per repetition all the way up to 8 seconds per repetition, it doesn't seem to matter. again, if you're thinking about explosiveness or building speed, or you're specifically using resistance training to build endurance, that's a separate matter. We talked about explosiveness and speed. I'll talk about endurance in a few moments. We also talked about in-between set contractions, the so-called selfie effect of people flexing a particular muscle, isolating a particular muscle between sets. Just want to mention that would be a terrible thing to do if your goal is performance on sets, so moving a particular amount of weight. That's actually going to diminish the amount of weight that you can move. It's going to enhance muscle growth, and it's going to enhance the nerve to muscle isolation of that particular pathway. So again, that flexing between sets is going to favor hypertrophy, not performance. If you're trying to get stronger, you're trying to move more weights, you're trying to distribute work, and you're trying to do maybe skill training with resistance, then flexing between sets is absolutely the wrong thing to do for obvious reasons. You're fatiguing the muscle further. Just remaining still or walking around a little bit has been shown to be beneficial in terms of moving some of the lactate out of the muscle, as well as just recovering between sets. Now, how long to recover between sets? There's a question. For the testosterone protocol, Duncan French and colleagues found that it was about 2 minutes, keeping that really on the clock, 2 minutes, not longer. For hypertrophy and for strength gains, it does seem that resting anywhere from 2 minutes or even 3 or 4 or even 5 or 6 minutes can be beneficial. And if you're interested in expanding the volume of work that you can do in a given session at high capacity, at high intensity with a given weight, please see the episode that I did on cold and performance, about supercharging performance, which is based on the work of my colleague Craig Heller in the biology department at Stanford, which talks about palmar cooling, about how you can cool the core of the body best through the palms using these particular venous portals that are only present in your hands. People are now doing this with ice packs or with gel packs. There are a number of different ways one can do this. I talk all about that in that episode. It allows you to do more repetitions and more work at a given weight over time. So rather than getting 10 repetitions and then 8 and then 7 and then 6, through proper use of palmar cooling, one can do 10, 10, 10, 10, and even add sets. And that's one way that one can accomplish higher volume work without having to drop the weight considerably. So that's where you can hit that really sweet spot, if that's your goal, of getting strong and generating some hypertrophy. Because as soon as you have to drop to lighter weights, then you're shifting more towards hypertrophy and endurance and less toward strength in a given muscle. So check out that episode. The last thing, besides between set contractions and whether or not you're distributing work or whether or not you're really trying to isolate muscles, is this notion of pre-exhausting muscles. It's been shown over and over again that, for instance, if you want to generate force in a given muscle and really isolate that, doing the isolation work before a compound movement, so this would be leg extensions, the thing where you sit and you extend your toes up toward the ceiling. Leg extensions before squats will allow the squats to target that muscle group more effectively. And that makes perfectly good sense based on the Henneman size principle and fatiguing motor units. It should be obvious why that's the case. But of course, that's going to be anti-performance in terms of how much weight you can lift and maybe even the form that you can maintain when you move to the bigger compound movement. So you really have to ask yourself a number of questions. How good are you at isolating a given muscle? Therefore, how many sets do you want to do? How often are you willing to train? Therefore, how many sets are you going to do in a given session versus how many are you going to distribute across the week? Are you aiming for performance? Are you going to distribute that work across the nervous system and musculature? Are you trying to move weights or are you trying to challenge muscles? If you're trying to challenge muscles, then you really want to focus on things like this pre-exhausting, the isolation of a muscle before the compound movement. Your performance on compound movements will absolutely suffer, but your ability to isolate that muscle and generate hypertrophy through the accumulation of larger myosin, those bigger balloons, will benefit. And once again, if you're trying to get faster, then the speed of the movement really matters.